The country up around our ranch was certainly not anything like this country. It was either flat or undulating, and it had a lot of beautiful playa lakes on it every time it would rain. And when it did, we'd hear the curlews, which had a plaintive call, which you could hear. And if I by accident hear a curlew, they're almost extinct in this part of the world. I'll never forget that plaintive call that the curlew have. It's a long-legged, rather pretty good-sized bird that has a long curved beak, and they waded out in those playa lakes to eat. And then also at night, we had lots of coyotes. And as soon as it got dark, those coyotes would start to howl back and forth to each other. And it's a sound that a lot of people don't like, but I love to hear those coyotes howl, and it was wonderful to go to sleep to hear them howling at night. And we had other wildlife too, with lots of prairie dogs. And my mother used to let us sit on the running boards, or stand on the running board, or sit on the fenders, and people had fenders that time that covered their tires. And she'd get out on the prairie and chase badgers. And she never was able to go very fast, and she never did really try to hit one. But she enjoyed seeing them run in front of the car, which they did. And there were also lots of rattlesnakes. And I'll never forget I went barefooted most of the time. We had a man, he was out hunting rabbits one day, and I was going along looking up at the sky, singing, and looked down, and I'd almost put my foot right down into a coiled rattlesnake. And I started screaming and yelling and couldn't move, just stood there with my foot up in the air. And Robert, the man's name was Robert Cummings turned around and shot that rattlesnake from underneath my foot. But we cut off the rattles, and I think it had about 20 rattles. And the rattles were supposed to indicate the age of the snake. They got a new rattle every year. I don't think any of us ever did get bitten by a snake. I don't recall that we did, but they were there. And also lots of jackrabbits. And I don't see a jackrabbit anymore. They're almost gone in this part of the world. But it was pretty primitive. But I've told about driving up there before. We could sit on our front porch and see a mesa in the distance. It was over in New Mexico called Rabbit Ear. And when we were driving up here and Rabbit Ear would begin to come into view, we'd all start yelling, "I see Rabbit Ear," and somebody said, "Now you know you didn't, I saw it first." We never did decide who got to see Rabbit Ear first. But I never could figure out why Rabbit Ear looked like a rabbit ear, because it didn't to me. And I didn't know until I was grown and read about it that Rabbit Ear was the name of a famous Commanche chief who lived out in that part of the world. And that was really, all of that part of Texas was Commanche Country. And it was a wonderful, wonderful thing for a child, an atmosphere for a child to grow up in and hear all those stories. You asked me one time what we did for fun, and I forgot to tell you about the old mare that we all loved named Baldy. And Baldy, we'd go get Baldy and bring her up and put a bridle on her, but no saddle. And maybe 3 or 4 of us would get on Baldy to ride. And Baldy would start around the house in a circle. She'd go start, and there was a big apple tree out in the back that had a low limb. And old Baldy, we couldn't guide her away from that limb to save our life. And she would go to the low limb and wipe us all off of her rear end, and we'd all go off on the ground. And then she'd get on the other side and stop, and we'd all get on, start around the house again. Come around the house, and Baldy would wipe us all off, stop for us all to get on. We'd get on, and she'd come around and do it. And we would do that for the hour. And I remember time, she was a good, placid old horse and a good riding horse. And I remember one time Aunt Johnny was visiting up there, and she put a saddle on Baldy, and I sat in front of Aunt Johnny in that saddle, and we all rode. There were other horses and people. We all rode over to Buffalo Springs, where there was the springs. Naturally, that's why it was named Buffalo Springs, and had a picnic, and that was fun. And there were a lot of mounds around there with stones around them that we always guessed. We never dug any of them up, but we always guessed that perhaps those were Indian graves. We did not know for sure, but they could have been. We never did have any antelope, or pronghorns they call them, rather than antelope. We used to call them antelope, but they are pronghorns. And if they had some on our ranch, we never did see them. They were very shy back in those days. But now you do get to see the pronghorns on some of the big ranches up there.
Tell us about some of the people who worked out there that you remember.
Well, when I first went up there, the ranch foreman was a man named Alexander, and I really don't remember them too well, and I don't remember their names, because I really was just a little girl. We quit going there when I was 6 or 7 years old. I mean, on a regular basis in the summertime. So I don't remember them. I remember after we left, Daddy bought some people named Newman up there who had given him a job when he was a little boy. There were two of them, Bill Newman and his sister Anna. And they were characters if there ever came down the pike. They were brother and sister. Bill had a great big floppy mustache that hung down over his lips, and he used to strain his soup and his coffee through that mustache. And Aunt Anna probably weighed close to 300 pounds at least. And she wore high-top tennis shoes and a great big moo-moo. And she made biscuits that were about the size of a saucer. And fried ham and all of this stuff that was due to give you cholesterol until you just nearly die. But they really were not ranchers. They were tenant farmers, and that's where they really didn't know too much about ranching. But they had been good to Daddy when he was a little boy, and he wanted to be good to them. Now, Bill had a younger brother, and I'm not sure what that man, his name was also Newman, and he had 3 or 4 children. And so they also came up there and worked on the ranch. But I don't remember the names of any of the cowboys. I remember some of the funny things that happened with the animals. We had a big old sow one time that had about 11 piglets. And I was over at the barn sitting up on the fence looking at those new piglets, and I fell off in the pen. Well, that old sow came after me. They're very, very protective, and they can also be very dangerous. If that old sow could have caught me, she could have really hurt me. But I really made tracks and got out of that pen in a big hurry. And then I remember one time Mother and Daddy was going to butcher a calf. And they had put the calf in the barn to fatten it. And I'd go down every day and look at that calf. And I became very fond of the calf. And the day before they were to butcher it, I knew they were going to butcher it because I heard them talking about it. Mother and Daddy were going to text line, and Daddy was up there visiting Wichita Falls. And I was too sick to go. Well, anytime I was too sick to leave the ranch, Mother knew I was sick. And I was ashamed to tell her what it was. And it wasn't a thing in the world except I was just sick at my stomach at the very thought of their killing that little calf. I couldn't stand the thought of it. And those are just some of the memories that come and go from the ranch.
Now, Grandpa Morgan owned some other farms you had mentioned earlier.
That's right.
Where were those?
Down by Lockney. He had 2 down there. And there again, the Newmans ran those farms for him. Bill and Anna were on one farm, and his brother, wish I could think of that man's name. Anyway, he and his wife and children were on the other farm down there. And as usual, Daddy, with his good business sense, kept those farms, and they were not money makers. And he got rid of them just before they started putting in deep wells in that part of the world down there, and those farmers ended up multi-millionaires. So we would also go down there with him to those farms. I had farming and ranching experience there, and then later on I had farming and ranching experience with Dr. Rasco after I married into that family. But that's another story.